Welcome to today's episode of our podcast, where we dig into the heart of one of the biggest issues facing the US economy: irresponsible public spending. You've probably heard the warnings, you've seen the headlines, but what does it really mean when the US continue to spend far beyond its means, amassing a mountain of public debt? And more importantly, who will pay the price when this bubble financially bursts? Today we'll explore the future consequences of this growing problem and ask, when will the US economy collapse under the weight of its own enormous public debt? And who will be affected the most? Before we get into the details, let's set the stage. The US public debt stands at over 30 trillions. That's right, trillions. To give you an idea of how staggering that number is, it's more than the entire economic output of the country in a year. We're talking about a debt-to-GDP ratio that continues to climb, and while some economists believe the US can continue to carry this debt indefinitely, which is a big lie, others warn that we're on a collision course with economic disaster. But when will this collapse happen? Some say it could be within the next decades, as interest payment on the debt start consuming a larger and larger chunk of the federal budget. Others believe we have a bit more time, but there's no doubt that without major reforms, we're headed for trouble. Now let's look at who will bear the burden when this irresponsible spending finally catch up to us. First and foremost, it's our children and grandchildren who will pay the price. The national debt is often described as the ultimate burden placed on future generations. The money the US is borrowing today will eventually have to be paid back, or at least the interest on it will. This means future taxpayers, including today's young adults and children, will be stuck footing the bill. They'll likely face higher taxes, lower public services, and reduced government investment in things like infrastructure, education, and healthcare. The quality of life could diminish, and more of the federal budget will be dedicated to simply managing debt payments rather than improving the country. The middle class will also feel the brunt of the impact, as the government becomes more desperate to balance its book. We could see cuts to entitlement programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. The middle class, which rely heavily on these programs for retirement, security, and healthcare, will be hit hard. Many Americans are already living paycheck to paycheck, and any reduction in these services could push millions into financial distress. In addition to cut in benefits, the middle class will also likely face increased taxes. While politicians may promise to only tax the wealthy, history shows that eventually tax increase hit everyone. Inflation too could erode the purchasing power of the middle class as the government print more money to cover its debts, making everything more expensive. Small business owners, the backbone of the US economy, will also suffer. As the government increases taxes to cover its debt obligations, small businesses will see their profits squeezed. The cost of doing business will rise, and fewer resources will be available for innovation, expansion, or hiring. This could lead to job losses, slower economic growth, and a less competitive business environment. Additionally, as the government spending shifts to service debt, less money will be available for programs that support small businesses, such as grants, loans, and infrastructure development. Entrepreneurs may find it hard to get the capital they need to start and grow their businesses. But perhaps the people who will be hit the hardest are those who are already struggling, low-income individuals and families. When the economy slows down to the crushing weight of public debt, it's often the most vulnerable who suffer first. social safety net, such as food assistance programs and housing subsidies, will likely be cut. Unemployment could rise, and wages may stagnate as companies reduce cost in an uncertain economic environment. For many, this could mean falling deeper into poverty, with fewer government resources available to help them climb back out. It's a cruel irony that those who need the most help will often receive the least when a country's finances are in crisis. It's also important to consider the global implications. Investors, both foreign and domestic, will be affected by the U.S. inability to manage its debt. If the U.S. default on its debt or inflation spiral out of control, it could trigger a global financial crisis. The U.S. dollar is still the world reserve currency, and a collapse of confidence in the U.S. economy could send shockwaves through global markets, impacting economies around the world. Foreign investors who hold a significant portion of the U.S. debt could see the value of their holding plummet. This could lead to a global sell-off, further weakening the U.S. economy and exacerbating the financial pain. So when will the U.S. economy collapse under the weight of its huge public debt? That's the trillion-dollar question, isn't it? Some economists predict that as interest rates rise, the cost of serving the debt will become unsustainable. Right now, the U.S. is borrowing money at historically low interest rate. But as rates begin to creep up, the interest payment on the national debt will increase, potentially crowding out other government spending. If no action is taken, a crisis could emerge within the next 6, 10, or 20 years. However, it's important to note that predicting the exact timing of an economic collapse is extremely difficult. What we do know is that without meaningful reform, it's only a matter of time before the U.S. face reckoning. In conclusion, irresponsible public spending due to corruption and the growing national debt are problems that can no longer be ignored. The U.S. is on a dangerous path, and while some might hope that the economy can continue to grow its way out of this mess, history tells us that no nation can borrow endlessly without facing consequences. The Roman Empire, as an example. When the collapse happens, it will be the younger generation, the middle class, small business owners, and the most vulnerable who will suffer the most. The time for action is now, before we reach a tipping point that could lead to widespread economic and social hardship. And already we reached this tipping point, and the damage is beyond repair regarding the public debt mountain. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I hope this discussion shed light on the severity of the U.S. public debt crisis and who will ultimately pay the price. Remember to subscribe for more in-depth discussions on the most pressing issues of our time. Stay informed, stay engaged, and together let's work toward a brighter future for our kids.